Do you remember the color-coded alert system we used to have? Remember that? Tom Ridge announced the existence of our national color-coded Be Afraid alert chart about a decade ago, in March 2002. So we could tell at a glance how alert we were supposed to feel. And if you didn't feel like glancing at the Be Alert chart, at least at the airport, they would read periodic recorded statements over the intercom telling you out loud that today's threat level was orange. The threat level was always orange at the airport, no matter what else was going on in the rest of the country. We don't do that anymore. We don't do that. We got rid of the color-coded chart thing last year, and nobody complained. We also no longer have this. This is the Google Street View of one of the secret prisons we used to have in Romania. The Associated Press did a little overhead satellite view of it, too, so you can see just how snugged up our secret prison was against the railway lines in a really densely populated part of Bucharest. But yeah, that little thing there, that was ours. We are a country with 2 million people in prison or jail on any given day. America has thousands of prisons and jails right here at home, but we decided to open up a little something in Romania, too. In secret. Also in Poland and in a bunch of other places, we had secret overseas prisons. We don't do that anymore either. They said they emptied them out in 2006, and then in 2009, it became official policy that we do not do that anymore. For years, do you remember that there was a ban on taking photos at Dover? A ban on taking photos of flag-draped coffins of Americans killed in war, having their bodies brought back home to the United States. We, the public, were banned from seeing those pictures for years. But that ban is over now. We do not have that ban anymore. We don't do that anymore. We are now allowed to see. For a while, top-level U.S. policymakers approved torturing people. And Americans did torture people based on cockamamie policy advice that it was legal for them to do so. But the current president, President Obama, put a stop to that right when he took office. We do not do that anymore. Some things we stopped doing. Some things that we were told, yeah, maybe this is unprecedented, maybe this doesn't really seem like the kind of thing America does, but we have to do it. Some of those things from the past decade, where it was really hard to get our heads around the fact that we were doing those things. Some of those things are things that we have stopped doing. That said, some of the things we still are doing are still pretty hard to get your head around. We are still fighting the longest war in U.S. history, and it apparently still has 2+ years on the clock, unless the president speeds up his withdrawal plan. It's the longest war in U.S. history, and for most of that war, we were fighting it at the same time as another one of the longest wars in U.S. history. If you had told anybody in advance of that plan that that's how our country would spend the first decade plus of the 21st century, you would have been laughed at. Before we started doing it, you probably also could not have convinced anyone that after we closed all our secret prisons in places like Romania and Poland, we would still keep one offshore prison in a nearby communist country which doesn't want us there. In advance of us starting to do this stuff, how would you have convinced somebody? How would you have convinced somebody that we were going to do these things? How would you have convinced somebody that the United States would consider it legal to find a wanted American citizen living abroad, track him down in that other country, and then for the U.S. government to kill him with a missile in that other country? The man's father went to court in advance of our government doing that to try to stop the U.S. government from doing it. The father sued to say in advance that his son should be arrested instead of killed on the spot if he was found, but he was found and he was just killed on the spot with a missile, U.S. citizen. Then a month later, we killed his 16-year-old son, too, also an American citizen, same cause of death. We have done things in the past decade or so that if you asked anybody in advance of us starting to behave this way, whether the United States of America would ever be a country that behaved this way, there's no way you could have convinced anyone. We granted ourselves permission to act this way when we said our response to being the victim of a massive terrorist attack in 2001 was going to be that we were going to declare that we were at war. Congress passed an authorization of military force against the group that attacked us and associated forces. And the power granted by that authorization to use force undergirds a lot of the things that we have done over the past decade in this administration and in the previous one, things that constitute previously unimaginable behavior for the United States of America. We're on a war footing. And is that war footing forever? That's the question, right? When does it end? It's not a philosophical question. It is an empirical question, because This is not a war that we ever planned on winning. We planned on just fighting it for a while and then eventually stopping, maybe. And I'm not just saying that because that's my take on it and I'm a commie pinko liberal, although I am. I'm saying that because it's been the understanding all along from the people who declared this war in the first place that this was never something that we were going to know it was over because we'd had a winner. It was never planned that way.
You said to me a second ago, one of the things you'll lay out in your vision for the next 4 years is how to go about winning the war on terror. That phrase strikes me a little bit. Do you really think we can win this war on terror, for example, in the next 4 years?
I have never said we can win it in 4 years.
No, I'm just saying, can we win it? Do you see that?
I don't think you can win it.
Your daughters are how old now?
22.
22 years old. They're approaching the age, President Bush, they're going to have their own children. And when their kids are teenagers, are they going to, those kids, your grandchildren, be reading about al-Qaeda in the newspaper every day?
You know, I know if we're steadfast, strong, and resolute, and I say those words very seriously, it's less likely that your kids are going to live under the threat of al-Qaeda for a long period of time. I can't tell you, I don't have a definite end.
A definite end? I don't think you can win it. Our country has used the idea that we are at war, not just in Iraq, not just in Afghanistan, but all over the globe. We've used the idea that we are in this global war as the justification for us doing all kinds of things, exerting all kinds of power that would otherwise be not just indefensible for a country with a constitution like ours, not just indefensible, but almost unimaginable. And this global war of ours, they said from the beginning, would not end because there was going to be a winner declared. There couldn't be. It is not that kind of war. So if that's the case, and being in a war footing is what justifies all this behavior that we wouldn't otherwise be participating in, when does this war end? When do we get to say that the global war that we declared more than 11 years ago is now over? Well, today, for the first time, a U.S. government official started talking about how this ends.
Now that efforts by the U.S. military against al-Qaeda are in their 12th year, we must also ask ourselves, how will this conflict end?
This is the top lawyer at the Pentagon, the general counsel of the Defense Department, Jay Johnson, speaking today at Oxford University in Britain, broaching a subject that, as far as I know, nobody at a high level of government has been willing to officially broach since 9/11.
How will this conflict end? It is an unconventional conflict against an unconventional enemy and will not end in conventional terms. We cannot and should not expect al-Qaeda and its associated forces to all surrender, all lay down their weapons in an open field, or to sign a peace treaty with us. They are terrorist organizations, nor can we capture or kill every last terrorist who claims an affiliation with al-Qaeda. I can offer no prediction about when this conflict will end, or whether we are, as Winston Churchill once described it, near the, quote, beginning of the end, end quote. I do believe that on the present course, there will come a tipping point at which so many of the leaders and operatives of al-Qaeda and its affiliates have been killed or captured, and the group is no longer able to attempt or launch a strategic attack against the United States, such that al-Qaeda as we know it, the organization that our Congress authorized the military to pursue in 2001, has been effectively destroyed.
We're approaching a tipping point. I just want to jump in here for a second to say that this part here, this is the unprecedented part. This is the part that we've been waiting for. Watch.
At that point, we must be able to say to ourselves that our efforts should no longer be considered a, quote, armed conflict against al-Qaeda and its associated forces. Rather, a counterterrorism effort against individuals who are the scattered remnants of al-Qaeda or are parts of groups unaffiliated with al-Qaeda, for which the law enforcement and intelligence resources of our government are principally responsible.
It will at some point stop being war, and we'll go back to being police work and intelligence work against terrorism as a threat that we fight, but we do not say we are at war with it anymore. How much would it change us back as a country to hit that point? Can we go back? Have we irredeemably and irreversibly changed ourselves by being at war for 12 years now. And is this first word from the Obama administration on how we might do it enough to reasonably expect that we really are ever actually going to get there?
War violates the natural order of things, in which children bury their parents. In war, parents bury their children. In its 12th year, we must not accept the current conflict and all that it entails as the, quote, new normal.
Joining us now is my friend Ron Suskind. He's Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, senior fellow at Harvard Center for Ethics. He's the author of many best-selling books, including The 1% Doctrine. Mr. Suskind, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure, Rachel.
Is there a window of political opportunity right now in Washington after this election to maybe change some of the very basic footing that we decided on after 9/11, some of the stuff that this president carried over from the previous president?
No, indisputably, and that's what people are hopeful about. Looking at this comment, it's being pulled apart word by word right now tonight. Is this going to be a predicate, an opportunity for the president, now that he doesn't have to stand for re-election, to do some of the things that people hoped he would have done in his first term? Certainly, shut down Guantanamo was a big promise. He couldn't manage it. He pulled back from that. There are clear issues here of the presidency, hopefully snapping back into the shape it had prior to 9/11. That's the hope of lots of constitutional scholars. It has not done that up to now. Most of the powers granted or obtained by the Bush administration have conveyed, if you will, to the Obama administration, with some caveats that you mentioned. So the question is this the beginning of this president creating, I guess, a new normal, as Johnson says, in which we are not in a state of war and the president is not executing war powers in a consistent and endless way?
Ron, you are a student of leadership, both a student of good leadership and bad leadership. I feel like leaders, good and bad, can generally be counted on to never give up power that they have been granted. If this president does draw a hard line under the war on terror, and the powers that I had that were associated with this war are no longer the powers of this office, I mean, is that a fantasy? Is that something that you can imagine this president doing? Can you imagine any president doing it?
Well, you know, if he's going to do it, this constitutional law president, it'll be in this term. You know, it might be toward the end of this term. Look, these issues, no matter what happens on some of these sort of legal standards, the issues in a way don't change. Small groups of people can get their hands on weapons that were once powerful and reserved for nations. That doesn't change. That's carried by technology, and it's one of the great perils of the modern age. Having said that, it's clear that this president has thought a lot about how to establish that crucial principle, rule of law, duly designated, to shape the U.S. policies. Now, here, let's be clear on what's at stake here. It's not so much drone strikes. I think that's been misinterpreted. The president, under the powers, Article 2 powers of the president, can continue with essentially the kind of a global war on terror, call it whatever you will, that he has been conducting, especially with the drone strikes. What he can do, he can kill, but he can't capture, interestingly enough, under Article 2. The big issue is Guantanamo, is that this particular pronouncement by Jay Johnson really is about Guantanamo. Under the current legal framework that we're looking at, Guantanamo, well, that won't work if we're not at war. They'll have to come up with a different legal structure to make that operative. And now, certainly, Congress can do that at some point. But Guantanamo is the question mark based on what Johnson said. It may be Johnson auditioning for Attorney General. You know, he's out of there in January. But it may be even more than that, a predicate, a little bit of groundwork by this administration to say, we're thinking about this, and this may be up ahead now that this president doesn't have to stand for re-election.
In terms of that as a predicate, maybe even a political predicate, either for Jay Johnson or for the administration as a whole, is there any significance in particular of him delivering this speech not in the United States? I mean, he did this speech at Oxford, and he did it right after the election. Do you see that as important?
Yeah, you know, I think time and place is always important. The British have a bit of a different position on some of these things than we do. Actually, they're a little bit ahead of us, you might say, on some of the issues of detainees, of how we conduct ourselves globally. You know, look, I think that we don't really know here, Rachel, until we hear more from the administration. This is raising a question. People are going to be pressing the administration in the next couple of days to say, can you give us more specifics? Is this the start of a new way of thinking and maybe new policies that will be unfolding in the next couple of months, let's say? Or is this just a trial balloon and you're seeing how it looks and how people react to it, and it may fall into the category of, look, we're trying and here you're catching us trying, but not much is going to happen. Look, the fact is, if there's another terrorist attack in the United States, many of these issues go right back to where we were, back to the restart button. And be clear, under the Article 2 powers of the presidency, this president can do a great deal, pretty much everything he does now and then some. The key issue is Guantanamo, is those prisoners, 166 prisoners, including 50 hardcore. The president has said, we don't know what we're going to do with those people. They would be sitting without a legal framework if we pull back from this war powers declaration from 2001. And that's a big issue, and that's a complex one.
Ron Suskind, Senior Fellow at Harvard Center for Ethics, author of The 1% Doctrine and many other books. Ron, thank you. It's great to have you here. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, if you want to have a further gander at that speech from Jay Johnson today, we are posting clips from it at maddowblog.com if you want to check that out. All right, so you know the shady trickery from this year's election about who would get to vote and how hard certain states were going to make it to vote this year? All of that shady trickery is still paying dividends today. Still. And that story's next.